I was 62 years old when I finally admitted out loud, though only to myself, that I didn't feel at home in my own house. It was a strange kind of ache, like arthritis in the soul. You feel it most in the quiet moments, pouring your morning coffee, folding laundry that isn't yours, hearing laughter behind a closed door you paid for. I'd spent my life working with my hands, building homes for other people. Retired now, with calloused palms and a back that stiffened if I sat too long, all I wanted was some peace. I thought I had found that when I married Vanessa. She was 10 years younger, sharp-tongued, but warm when she wanted to be. And she came with a daughter, Kayla, 12 at the time, sarcastic and stubborn. I didn't hesitate. I thought I had enough love to go around. At first, it wasn't so bad. I treated Kayla like I would have treated my own daughter, if I'd ever been lucky enough to have one. I drove her to school in the mornings before I sold my work truck, took her to doctor's appointments, helped her with math homework that had long since evolved into something I barely understood. When she turned 16, I bought her a used Honda, clean title, good tires, nothing flashy. I remember how her face lit up for half a second before she muttered, "It's not even Bluetooth." Still, I smiled. Teenagers, right? I told myself I just needed to be patient. That one day, when she was older, she'd look back and realize I was there for her. I never asked to be called Dad, but a little respect would have been nice. I didn't need a parade, just a thank you every now and then. But the truth started leaking in slowly, like water under a cracked foundation. Vanessa always found ways to undercut me in front of Kayla. Not in big, obvious ways, but in those small, corrosive jabs that chip away at your authority. If I told Kayla to clean up after herself, Vanessa would laugh and say, "She's just a kid, don't be so uptight." If I grounded her for sneaking out, Vanessa would quietly unground her the next day and say, "She needs space to grow." And Kayla, she noticed. Of course she noticed. Kids always do. She learned quickly that I could be overridden, that my words didn't carry weight. I had a seat at the table, but I wasn't the man of the house. I was the man in the house, until they didn't need me anymore. I remember one night in particular. It was a Thursday, just a quiet dinner after a long day of yard work. I had grilled some chicken and made mashed potatoes from scratch. We sat at the table, and Kayla was glued to her phone, barely acknowledging us. I said, calm and polite, "Hey, put the phone away while we eat, all right?" She didn't even look up, just rolled her eyes and muttered, "You're not my dad." Then, louder, "You're just a glorified babysitter." I looked at Vanessa, thinking surely she'd say something. Maybe remind her daughter that we show respect to people who've earned it. Instead, Vanessa let out this little chuckle, took a sip of her wine, and said, "She's not wrong. You can't force her." And in that moment, I felt something snap, not loudly, not with rage, but like a door quietly closing in my heart. I didn't say a word. I stood up, took my plate to the sink, and left the room. That night, I sat alone in the backyard. The sun had already dipped behind the trees, and the cicadas had begun their chorus. I just sat there in a rusted lawn chair, staring into the dark, wondering what the hell I had spent the last 6 years doing. I thought about the thousands I'd poured into Kayla's education, the car, the college fund I set up behind closed doors, money from my retirement savings, mind you. I thought about the weekends I gave up to drive her to volleyball tournaments, the late nights I spent waiting up just to make sure she got home safe. And for what? To be told I was a glorified babysitter? To be laughed at by the woman I married when I asked for basic respect in my own home? I felt humiliated. Worse than that, I felt used. And that's when it hit me. They never saw me as part of their family. I was a utility, a source of comfort, of money, of protection, but not of love, not of real connection. And maybe that was my fault. Maybe I had tried so hard to be agreeable, to play nice, to blend into a family that already had its rhythms, that I forgot to ask if they ever actually wanted me in it. Love without boundaries is just self-destruction in slow motion. I kept giving because I wanted to be loved, but all I got in return was tolerance, at best. And that night, with the crickets buzzing in the sky so still it felt like it was holding its breath, I decided I was done. I didn't storm back into the house. I didn't make some grand announcement. I just sat there, letting the air cool around me, letting the truth settle like dust in my chest. I'd been building a life around people who didn't care if I stayed or left. So maybe it was time to stop building for them and start reclaiming something for myself. I barely slept that night. I tossed and turned on the edge of the bed, staring up at the ceiling fan, listening to Vanessa breathe steady beside me like nothing had happened. I kept waiting for her to say something, anything, to lean over and ask if I was okay, or maybe even apologize for letting her daughter talk to me like that. But silence stretched out between us like a canyon, and I realized she wasn't sorry. Not even a little. If anything, she probably thought I was overreacting. Sensitive, even. That's what she used to say when I brought up how left out I felt. "You're too sensitive, baby. She's a teenager. Let her be." But this wasn't about teenage hormones. This was about the fact that in her eyes, I was never truly a parent in this house. I was the help, the backup plan, the man with the mortgage and the patience to endure being ignored. The next morning, I went through my usual routine, but it felt like I was moving through someone else's life. I shaved, poured my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table while Kayla shuffled in, headphones in her ears, dressed for school. She didn't say a word, didn't look at me, just grabbed a granola bar and left without so much as a glance in my direction. Vanessa came down 5 minutes later, barefoot, hair in a loose bun, wearing one of my old flannel shirts like it was hers now. She didn't mention what happened either. She asked if we needed more milk and said she might stop by Target after work. That was it. Like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't been humiliated at that table the night before in my own home. That kind of disregard cuts deeper than any insult. Because it wasn't just about the words anymore. It was about what they didn't say. The silence was more telling than any outburst. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold and pulled out my laptop. I logged into the account where I'd been slowly squirreling away money for Kayla's college. $400 a month since she turned 14. It wasn't much, but it would have been enough to help her start without drowning in debt. I stared at the balance for a long time. Over $20,000. Money that could have gone to travel, to upgrades around the house, to anything else. And with one quiet click, I closed the account. I transferred the funds back into my personal savings, where it should have stayed in the first place. No tears, no guilt, just a steady calm, like a fever finally breaking. That girl wasn't my daughter, and I wasn't going to finance a future that didn't include me. Let her real father step up, if he even existed in more than just name. Once the money was handled, I stepped outside into the garage, opened the side cabinet where I kept all the paperwork, and grabbed the title to Kayla's car. I'd kept it in my name from day one, just in case. I took photos, listed it online, and within 2 hours, I had a buyer scheduled for the afternoon. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. That car wasn't a gift anymore. It was a loan from a man who'd been made to feel like a fool. And when people treat you like you're disposable, you stop offering things that make their lives more comfortable. That's not revenge, it's math. Input versus output. Effort versus reward. She got the car because I believed I was building a future with her in it. But after last night, I knew I wasn't part of that vision. I was just the ride to get her there. Around noon, my old friend Gary stopped by. He was dropping off some tools I'd lent him weeks ago, but the moment he saw my face, he asked, "You all right?" I hadn't told anyone what happened yet. I hadn't needed to. But the way he looked at me, like he already knew something had broken, made me sit down and finally let it out. I told him everything. The disrespect, the laugh, the silence from Vanessa. I expected him to tell me to calm down, to let it blow over. Instead, he just shook his head and said, "You've been too good for too long, man. They don't see you. They see what you do for them, but not you. There's a difference." And he was right. I had tried to buy my way into a family that never made space for me. And now that I was cutting off the supply, I could finally see the truth of it all. They never loved me. They loved the lifestyle I gave them. When Vanessa and Kayla got home that evening, the Honda was already gone. The buyer had come and gone, cash in hand, and the driveway sat empty. I was sitting on the porch when Kayla pulled in and stared, confused, at the space where her car should have been. She stormed toward me, indignant, her voice already raised. "Where's my car?" she demanded, like I was a valet who lost her keys. I didn't flinch. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Ask your real dad." Her face twisted into something between shock and fury. She turned to Vanessa, who was just standing there with her mouth slightly open. Neither of them said anything for a moment, just stood there, stunned that I'd finally done something on my terms. It was the first time I saw the power shift in real time. I didn't yell. I didn't justify myself. I just stood up, walked past them both, and shut the door behind me. That night, they sulked and stewed in the living room, whispering too loudly for it to be anything but deliberate. Kayla cried once, loud and performative. Vanessa slammed the cabinet doors when she made tea. But I stayed upstairs, door shut, watching an old Western with the volume low and the subtitles on. Every now and then, I heard Vanessa mutter something about how he's acting crazy or he's being dramatic. But none of it mattered anymore. That switch had flipped. And once it does, it doesn't flip back. There's no unseeing the moment you realize your love has been taken for granted. No unhearing the words that finally told the truth. They wanted to remind me I wasn't family? Fine. Message received. I woke up the next morning with a strange sense of clarity, like the fog had lifted from a coastline that had been hidden too long. It wasn't peace exactly, more like stillness. That kind of eerie quiet that comes after a storm, when you're left to clean up the debris and see what's still standing. I padded downstairs barefoot, made my coffee without turning on the lights, and stood by the window watching the sun come up over the neighbor's roof. I should have been angry, maybe even devastated, but I wasn't. What I felt instead was focus. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I didn't care how it looked. You only let people burn you so many times before you stop handing them matches. By the time Vanessa came downstairs, I had already opened the safe and removed the file folder with all the financial records. Kayla's college fund details, the insurance policy I had once added her to, even the paperwork from the DMV that still showed the car under my name. Vanessa shuffled into the kitchen wearing her usual robe, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and said, "You know she cried herself to sleep last night." I didn't answer right away. I just sipped my coffee and flipped through the papers. When I finally looked up, I said, "That's not my problem." Her eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me," she said, as if I'd spoken a foreign language. "She's not my daughter, Vanessa. You've said it enough times, so I'm done pretending otherwise." She blinked, stunned, and I could see the beginning of panic creeping into her expression. That was the moment she realized this wasn't just a mood. This was a decision. I spent the rest of that day doing what most people would have saved for lawyers or therapists. I logged into every joint account, every insurance document, every emergency contact list, and removed Kayla's name from anything tied to me. I wasn't being spiteful. I was reclaiming what I should have never given away so freely. That girl had a mother, and maybe she had a father somewhere too, but I wasn't going to keep playing the role of the backup when I'd been told, clearly and publicly, that I had no authority. Funny how fast people call you family when there's money involved, but the moment you ask for respect, they remind you of your place. I wasn't interested in playing their game anymore. Around noon, I got a call from Kayla's school counselor. She said Kayla had shown up late and visibly upset, and they wanted to make sure things were okay at home. I paused before answering, then said, "She's 17. Not a child. If she's upset, maybe ask her why she called the man who paid for her car a babysitter." The silence on the other end lasted just a few seconds too long. "Understood," the counselor finally said, her tone changing. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I just wanted people to stop assuming I was going to keep showing up for someone who clearly didn't value me. Gary dropped by again in the afternoon, this time with 2 cold beers and a look on his face like he was checking in on a patient after surgery. We sat on the porch, the autumn air just crisp enough to remind you the seasons were changing, like everything else. "So, what's the next move?" he asked, handing me a bottle. I took a long sip before answering. "They're going," I said. "I'm not dragging this out. I'm not sleeping under the same roof as people who don't want me here until it's convenient again." He nodded slowly, didn't argue. That's why I respected Gary. He didn't offer sugar-coated advice or play devil's advocate. He just listened, and sometimes that's the most loyal thing a person can do. That evening, I typed up a formal 30-day notice. I wasn't going to throw them out cold, not yet. I gave Vanessa the paper after dinner, which she and Kayla had eaten alone in silence, plates clinking in a kitchen that suddenly felt like enemy territory. When I handed her the envelope, she didn't open it at first. "What is this?" she asked. You're giving me 30 days to leave, I said. I'm being generous. She stared at me, and her voice dropped. You can't be serious. You're kicking your family out. I didn't blink. You made it clear I'm not family. So now I'm acting accordingly. She finally opened the letter and scanned the print. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. Eventually, she just stood up and walked into the other room. Kayla stormed up the stairs a few minutes later, slamming her bedroom door so hard a picture frame fell off the hallway wall. I didn't move. I just kept sitting there at the dining table, slowly finishing my meal. It was the first time I had eaten in that house without a knot in my stomach. It tasted like freedom. That night, I called a locksmith and scheduled an appointment for the following afternoon. I wasn't going to wait for another blow-up to protect my space. Once they were gone, I'd be changing everything: codes, locks, garage openers. I didn't want so much as a spare key floating around. This wasn't a cooling-off period. This was an ending. The locksmith arrived the next afternoon, right on schedule, 3:30 sharp. A young guy, probably in his late 20s, polite and eager, pulling tools from the back of his van like he had no idea he was about to become a footnote in a personal revolution. I led him around the property, pointing out which doors needed new locks. You want to do the garage code too? He asked, screwdriver in hand. Yeah, I said. Everything. He nodded and got to work, whistling while he unscrewed the deadbolts like this was just another Tuesday. For him, it was. For me, it was the final nail in the coffin of a home that had stopped feeling like mine a long time ago. Changing the locks wasn't about security. It was about finality. It was about saying, you don't get to come back when you remember I was good to you. Vanessa pulled into the driveway around 4:15, with Kayla in the passenger seat, mid-sentence about something she clearly thought was life-shattering. The moment they saw the locksmith, I watched confusion twist into suspicion on Vanessa's face like a storm forming right in front of me. She parked the car, slammed the door, and marched up to the porch. What's going on? She asked, trying to keep her voice even, but it cracked at the edges. The locksmith glanced at me, unsure, and I just gave him a nod to keep going. I'm changing the locks, I said plainly. You've got until 6 to grab what you need. Vanessa blinked hard. You're serious? You're really doing this? I didn't answer her question. Instead, I repeated, you've got until 6. Kayla stood behind her, arms crossed, mouth already forming some sarcastic retort. You're really kicking us out like we're trash? She spat. After everything we've been through? I looked at her, not angrily, not even coldly, just clear-eyed. Finally. You call me a babysitter. Your mom agreed. Babysitters don't house people. Babysitters clock out. And I'm clocking out. Her jaw dropped, stunned into silence. And for once, she didn't have a comeback. Vanessa looked like she might cry, but I couldn't tell if it was from guilt or shock. Either way, I wasn't moved. You don't get to set fire to someone's dignity and then get sad about the smoke. The two of them scrambled inside, slamming cabinets and closet doors, grabbing clothes and electronics in frantic handfuls. I stayed out on the porch, arms crossed, leaning against the rail. I didn't want to see what they packed. I didn't want to watch them treat my house like a looted store during a riot, grabbing only what mattered to them. I already knew they weren't going to take anything I'd given them out of love, because to them, it was never about the love. It was about what they could use, what made their lives easier, what gave them the illusion of stability without the effort of respect. At one point, Vanessa came to the front door, holding a jewelry box and a duffel bag, her face pale. Where are we supposed to go? She asked, quiet now. Not defiant, just lost. I don't know, I said honestly. That's not my responsibility anymore. She stared at me, searching for something. Maybe the man who used to make her coffee on Saturday mornings, or the one who fixed her leaky sink without asking. But he wasn't standing there anymore. That man had been pushed out the moment she laughed at me over dinner. That laugh, sharp, dismissive, careless, had been louder than anything she could say now. By 5:45, they were mostly done. I could hear Kayla muttering curses under her breath as she stuffed bags into the back seat. She slammed the trunk closed and stormed past me without eye contact. Vanessa lingered by the porch, clutching her purse like it might explode. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it, she said, barely audible. I let the silence stretch. Finally, I said, that's the problem. You thought I'd just take it. Again. She nodded slowly, and for a moment, she looked older than she was, tired, wrinkled around the eyes, drained of all that smug energy she used to weaponize so well. She opened her mouth like she might apologize, but nothing came out. And then she walked to the car. The engine turned over, they backed out of the driveway, and just like that, they were gone. No drama, no tears, no begging. Just the sound of gravel under tires, and the slow, steady swing of the screen door behind me as I stepped back into my house. For the first time in years, it felt like mine. Not because I paid for it, but because there was no longer anyone in it who disrespected me under my own roof. That night, I walked through the empty rooms, each one holding its own kind of ghost. The living room where we used to watch movies, always her pick. The kitchen where I used to cook breakfast for people who barely said thank you. The hallway where Kayla once told a friend on the phone, loud enough for me to hear, "He's not really my stepdad. He's just my mom's husband." It all echoed now, but it echoed honestly. No more pretending. No more false family photos on the walls. Just me and the quiet truth. When the locksmith texted to confirm everything had been changed, I responded with a simple thanks. I went to bed early that night, not because I was exhausted, but because I didn't need to listen to whispered complaints or slammed doors. I lay down in silence, the kind you don't realize you've been starving for until it surrounds you like a warm blanket. And for the first time in what felt like years, I slept all the way through the night. The fallout came fast and ugly, like a wildfire fed by dry brush and gossip. It started the next morning when my niece texted me a screenshot of Kayla's TikTok. There she was, crocodile tears smeared with mascara, sitting in the passenger seat of Vanessa's car, saying she'd been kicked out by her stepdad for standing up for herself. The captions were dramatic. "He changed the locks while we were still inside. My mom has nowhere to go. How do you throw out your own family?" The comment section was even worse. Strangers, thousands of them, calling me every name in the book. Control freak. Abusive. Cold-hearted old man. I scrolled for about 10 seconds before closing the app and setting my phone face down on the table. I had expected silence, maybe a little judgment, but not this tidal wave of digital pitchforks. What none of them knew, what they refused to imagine, was how long it took me to get to that point. Nobody sees the years of disrespect. They only see the final push and cry foul. By noon, Vanessa's sister was calling me. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 2 years. She always struck me as someone who wore perfume too strong and opinions even stronger. "What the hell is going on, Richard?" she demanded before I could even say hello. "You kicked your own wife and stepdaughter out onto the street." I let her rant for nearly a full minute before I calmly said, "Vanessa's not my wife anymore, and Kayla made it clear I was never her stepfather." I just followed their lead. There was a pause, just a beat, and then she started in again, saying I was heartless, saying Kayla was traumatized, saying I'd ruined a young girl's life. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I simply said, "If you're so concerned, open your guest room." She hung up after that. Loudly. No goodbye. Later that week, I ran into Frank, my neighbor 3 houses down, while we were both collecting mail. He's one of those guys who mows his lawn in straight lines and waves from across the street, but never really talks much. This time, he crossed the road. "Heard the girls moved out," he said carefully. "You all right?" I nodded, surprised by the question. "More than all right," I said. He gave a short laugh. "Good. You always treated him right. Can't pour from an empty cup, you know?" It was the first time someone validated me without needing the whole backstory. Just that simple truth, that you can't keep giving when you're drained, meant more than any apology I never got. Turns out, people notice more than you think. They just wait to see how it ends before they pick a side. One night, a week after they were gone, I got a message on Facebook from my ex-wife's sister, Ellen. That surprised me. We'd lost touch years ago, after my first marriage ended peacefully but firmly. Ellen had always liked me, though, and her message was short but striking. "I always admired your patience. I hope you're finally choosing yourself." I sat with that message for a long time before replying. "I should have chosen myself sooner," I wrote back. She responded with a heart, and nothing more. That tiny exchange stayed with me for days. Not because it offered absolution, but because it reminded me that not everyone needed a public meltdown to see what had been brewing for years beneath the surface. Of course, not everything was neat or affirming. The first time I ran into Vanessa at the grocery store, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was tied up carelessly, no makeup, and Kayla wasn't with her. We locked eyes in the produce section, both holding onto opposite ends of a broken history. She approached me slowly, pushing her cart with one hand like it might shield her from whatever awkwardness hung between us. "I just came for eggs," she said, almost joking, but her voice cracked halfway through. I nodded and said, "Well, I'm not going to stop you." She looked like she wanted to say more. Maybe explain. Maybe lash out. Maybe just remember who I used to be. But after a few seconds, she turned and walked away. No argument. No scene. Just gone. Again. That same night, I got a voicemail from Kayla. I recognized the number, but hadn't saved it. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, almost small. "I didn't mean it like that," she said. "I was just mad. I didn't think you'd actually do all this. I missed the house. I missed the quiet." She paused. "Mom's been off. She cries a lot. I'm just tired. I thought maybe I could stop by and grab some of my books." Then it ended. No apology. No ownership. Just a vague attempt to wriggle back in through the cracks. I didn't return the call. Not because I was angry, but because I was finally learning not to open doors that had already slammed shut on me. People love to judge a man when he stops tolerating disrespect. They say you're bitter, that you're overreacting, that you're cruel. But nobody lives in your skin. Nobody hears the way silence feels after a decade of small humiliations. Nobody sees the nights you spend eating alone in your own house while being treated like furniture. And when you finally draw the line, when you finally say, "No more," they act shocked, like you've turned into a villain overnight. But the truth is, I didn't change. I just stopped hiding how tired I was. 2 weeks passed before the house finally felt quiet in a way that didn't make me flinch. At first, the silence felt like something was missing, like the background hum of chaos had been suddenly muted, leaving only my own breath for company. But over time, it settled. It stopped being silence and started being stillness. There were no more slammed doors. No more eye rolls at dinner. No more laughter that made me feel like the joke. For the first time in 6 years, I could walk through my house without stepping around someone else's mess or swallowing my own resentment like cough syrup. I could light a fire in the fireplace without someone complaining about the smell, and I could turn off the TV without a teenage groan echoing down the hallway. I didn't realize how much space they had taken up in my life until they were no longer there to fill it. The first thing I did was clean. Not a surface-level wipe down, but a deep, meditative kind of cleaning. I pulled everything out of the kitchen cabinets, threw away expired food, scrubbed the tile grout with a toothbrush. I repainted the hallway where Kayla had once plastered posters of boy bands and influencers I never learned the names of. That wall was mine now. I stood there with a roller dripping in fresh paint, covering years of noise and soft, quiet strokes of gray. It was therapeutic, not just because it refreshed the walls, but because it erased something that had always felt borrowed. It was like reclaiming square footage of my own soul. There's something sacred about taking care of a space no one else is trying to control. I rearranged the living room. I bought new bedding. I replaced the broken lamp that had gone ignored for months because every time I mentioned it, someone rolled their eyes like I was being dramatic. Now, I wasn't asking permission. I wasn't negotiating. I was curating peace. About a week after the voicemail, Kayla showed up at the front door. I saw her through the peephole, standing there with a canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder and a plastic grocery sack in the other. She looked smaller somehow, like the anger had worn off and left her hollow. I didn't open the door. I just stood there behind it, letting her presence exist without giving it access. She knocked once, then again, and finally left the bags on the porch before walking back to a car I didn't recognize. When I finally stepped outside, I found a note inside one of the bags. "Just wanted to return these," it read. Inside were 3 books, 2 of mine and one that I'd given her last Christmas, a collection of essays about growing up and letting go. I picked it up and flipped to the inside cover. She had scratched out my name. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt done. People always think forgiveness is some grand moment, tears, apologies, a heartfelt hug in the rain. But for me, it came in the form of not reacting. I could have called her. I could have texted. I could have made some effort to bridge the distance. But I didn't. Not because I hated her, but because I no longer needed her to understand me. The moment I stopped needing that, I was free. I burned the note in the fire pit out back. Not out of spite, just to let it go. It turned to ash in seconds. That's what closure looks like sometimes. Not a reunion. Just a final, quiet decision to stop reopening a wound that never had the tools to heal. In the following weeks, I made changes to the house. Subtle ones, but meaningful. I took down the family portraits we had taken 3 summers ago, the ones where I'd paid for the photographer and still managed to look like a guest in my own frame. I replaced them with landscapes, old fishing photos from my younger days, and a black and white picture of my first dog. I updated my will, removed Vanessa and Kayla as beneficiaries, and replaced them with my niece and my local animal shelter. I changed my emergency contact to Gary. He didn't ask questions, just said, "About time," and clinked his beer bottle against mine. When a man starts building his life around people who don't expect anything from him but honesty, things get simpler. Lighter. And lighter is how I wanted to live for the rest of my days. One Sunday morning, I found myself back at the lake where I used to take Kayla fishing when she was 12. She never liked it. Always complained about the bugs and the smell of bait, but I remembered those mornings fondly because they were quiet. She was too young then to be mean, too distracted to roll her eyes. I sat on the edge of the dock, rod in hand, watching the ripples on the water catch the light. A teenage boy and his father stood a few yards down, laughing about something I couldn't hear. It made me smile, not with envy, but with peace. Some men get to have that. Some don't. I had tried. I gave it my best. But not every effort is rewarded with love, and not every wound is meant to be reopened just because it once looked like family. I never remarried. I don't see myself trying again. Not because I'm bitter, but because I finally understand the value of solitude. There's a quiet kind of dignity in living alone on your own terms. I still have friends. Still host a barbecue every now and then. Still attend church, sit in the back, nod politely when the sermon gets too long. But I no longer go home to chaos. I no longer feel like I'm tiptoeing in my own house. And every night, before I turn out the lights, I check the locks, not out of fear, but out of ceremony. The final lock wasn't just on the door. It was on the part of me that used to beg to be seen. And now? Now I don't beg. I rest. Have you ever reached that breaking point where you realized you were being tolerated, not truly loved? Where everything you gave, your time, your money, your heart, was met with entitlement or silence? This story is about drawing a line, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. If you've ever had to walk away to protect your peace, share your experience in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story hit home, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories about choosing dignity over dysfunction. You're not alone. See you soon in the next story.